Hey folks, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic, and March of the Machine is here. And along with it, you'll find forces from across the multiverse joining in the efforts to repel the Phyrexian invasion. It's in this teamwork you'll find the core of the Divine Convocation deck, a Jeskai, red, blue, and white deck all about having your creatures help cast your spells with Convoke. Let's start with our box legend, Kasla the Broken Halo. Kasla is a 6-mana 5/4 angel ally with Convoke. Convoke is a returning mechanic in which you can tap your creatures to help pay for spells with Convoke. It turns any creature you control into a mana dork, but only for Convoke spells. Kasla also has Flying, Vigilance, and Haste, and whenever you cast another spell with Convoke, scry 2, then draw a card. We have the core tenets of the deck spelled out right here on Kasla. Make creatures to cast Convoke spells, and profit from casting Convoke spells. We'll take a look at how well the deck does these things out of the box, but of course Kasla isn't the only legend in the deck. No, she's joined by the team-up of Traft and Rem Karolus. This 3-mana Spirit Human is a melding of Geist of Traft and Rem Karolus Stalwart Slayer, both from the plane of Innistrad. This 3/4 reads, whenever Traft and Rem Karolus becomes tapped, create a 1/1 red human creature token if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, create a 1/1 blue spirit with flying, and if it's the third time, create a 4/4 white angel with flying. And whenever you cast a spell with Convoke, untap Traft and Rem. It's certainly interesting, but nothing too different. That last line of text about Convoke spells can certainly be ignored in some instances. Like, say, if you've got a Pemin's Aura and a Relic of Legends, you get to make all 3 of these tokens every turn. But you can see that these two aren't offering too much different. Both are leaning heavily into the Convoke theme. Really, is there enough to support it? Before we take a look, make sure to hit all those good buttons. Like, subscribe, and comment with your favorite additions to this list. These two appear basically interchangeable in the deck, but Kasla offers one thing Traft and Rem don't: card draw. Let's take a look at some ways to take advantage of these abilities, starting with the new Mistmeadow Vanisher. If this seems familiar, you may remember Mistmeadow Witch, a classic, repeatable source of flicker. Whenever the Vanisher becomes tapped, regardless of how, you can flicker a non-land, non-token permanent. A great way to reuse enter the battlefield effects if you can untap and tap her over and over again. Remember that the targeted permanent doesn't return until the next end step, so if you exile something in someone's end step, it won't return until the following turn. Also new in the list is Wildfire Awakener, a creature with X in its casting cost. In fact, for X, a generic, a white, and a red, you get a 3/2 human wizard with Convoke. And when it enters the battlefield, you create X 1/1 elementals that ping a player when they become tapped. If that's not a great way to make a boatload of fodder to tap for Convoke spells, I don't know what is. This is a one-man army, and if you can keep tapping those elemental tokens over and over, it's a legitimate win con provided you can make enough of them. And if you do want to make more of them, then the deck also includes the new Nesting Dovehawk, a 4-mana 2/2 bird with flying, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, populate, creating a copy of a token you control. And whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Nesting Dovehawk. If you're a token deck, this thing is a real engine. 4 mana may be a lot to ask for a 2/2, but the turn you cast it, you get to make a copy of the best token you control. That could be a 3/3 beast or a 4/4 angel or any number of things, but also immediately makes itself a 3/3 if the token is a creature. That's a lot of immediate value that's built on the back of an if you have a token, but every turn it gets bigger and bigger and better and better. Do not underestimate it. And let's not miss Flock Chaser Phantom. This is a 6-mana Convoke spirit that basically makes our deck work. A 5/5 with flying and vigilance, it simply says, when it attacks, the next spell we cast this turn has Convoke. Simple and effective, it gives our non-convoking spells Convoke. This means we can be heavily discounting everything from our mana rocks to our other creatures. There's no limit to what kind of spells gain Convoke, just ones cast next this turn. This is gas in this deck specifically. And the last new card to keep in mind is Deluxe Dragster. With so many of these new cards triggering on tapping, vehicles become very important, and the Dragster is a 4-mana 4/3 vehicle. that can't be blocked except by other vehicles, so a 4/3 that's basically unblockable. Whenever the Dragster deals combat damage to a player, you can cast an instant or sorcery from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost, then exiling the spell. With a crew of only 2, free spells are always pretty broken, and 4 unblockable damage and free spells gets really good really fast. The synergy here of helping your tapping creatures is really great. Now, this leaves us with the most difficult part. What are we cutting from this list? Now, interesting fact, but in this list, by default, there are only 18 cards with Convoke. That's an okay amount, but it's not that consistent. Not when there are 55 potential Convoke spells in these colors. So ideally, we're making room for more Convoke spells and more creatures that care about being tapped. Our cuts should focus on anything that doesn't fall into those 2 camps. Spirited Companion, Angel of Finality, and the Locust God are all generically good cards, but apart from having some cool enters the battlefield triggers or making us a few extra bodies late in the game, they aren't really knocking our socks off. The Locust God in particular comes down so late in the game that we need to be draw focused to actually get any kind of benefit from him. And we just aren't. At least not in the volumes Buggy Boy wants us to be. The same can be said for Nadir Kraken. We want free bodies, not ones that we have to pay additional mana for. And we want them to be at greater volumes than Goblin Instigator as well. These guys just aren't at the right rate for going as wide as we need. And while they are Convoke spells, both Artistic Refusal and Chant of the Vitu-Ghazi are overcosted and are asking us to tap down huge swaths of creatures for effects we could be paying 2 to 3 mana for without Convoke. Let's replace them with some better Convoke spells. I'd also like to cut Path of the Ghost Hunter, Fractured Power Stone, and Ichor Elixir. These cards all have to do with Plane Chase, and while this round of Precons does come with Plane Chase cards, the number of games you'll actually play with Plane Chase is pretty minimal, and it's not worth impacting your deck's overall construction. With room for 10 cards, what do we want to add in? And here we want better Convoke spells and ideally some things that make us bodies or negate the downsides of tapping creatures. Better Convoke spells like Clever Concealment. Brand new from the All Will Be One Commander Precons, this instant is a great gotcha spell with Convoke that phases out non-land permanents. Block and phase out to not lose your creatures or cast it in response to a board wipe. The big benefit with Convoke spells is that you can be tapped out mana-wise and still have a full grip of spells to cast. Well, how about Zephyr Singer? This 4-mana Siren Pirate is a 3/4 with Convoke, Flying, and Vigilance from March of the Machine. It also says, when it enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on each creature that convoked it. Simple, again, but effective. Turn your threats on the ground into threats in the sky by using them to cast the Singer. This could let you untap and soar to victory pretty easily. Also, let's look at the new Invasion of Segovia from March of the Machine for a similar reason we like Flock Chaser Phantom. This battle card is just 3 mana and makes us 2 1/1 Kraken tokens on enters the battlefield. Then we give it to an opponent to protect. Once we deal 4 damage to it, removing the counters, we flip it into Kalis, Sea Tyrant of Segovia, a 3/3 legendary serpent, with the very important text of non-creature spells you control have Convoke, and at the beginning of your end step, untap up to 4 target creatures. This guy, y'all! If you're building a Convoke deck, it's 100% necessary. Not only turning all non-creature spells into Convoke spells, but mitigating some of the risk of tapping our creatures. The creatures untapped don't even have to be creatures we tap to convoke a spell. They could have been attackers too. A great way to remain offensive and defensive every turn. Also helping to mitigate the downside of tapping down our creatures is the criminally underrated Drum Bellower from the Neon Dynasty Precons. A 3-mana, 2/1 Flying Spirit, it just lets us untap all of our creatures during each untap step, which, in this deck, is basically a Seedborn Muse. There's no way it doesn't earn a spot for helping us stay untapped and fueling our spells. Jeskai Ascendancy also really assists in mitigating these downsides too. When we cast a non-creature spell, we pump our entire board and untap them, in addition to triggering a looting effect. This is everything we want to help offset tapping down our creatures as we cast spells every turn, while also acting as a potential win condition if we can chain together a few spells on our turn ahead of combat. With a few new Convoke spells in the list and a few ways to give everything Convoke, how are we going to go wide enough to cast all this stuff? Well, fortunately, Monastery Mentor was just reprinted in March of the Machine and has never been more affordable. A 2/2 for 3 with Prowess, and making us a 1/1 monk with Prowess whenever we cast a non-creature spell, the Mentor makes us an army and fuels our spells all at once. He is perfect in this list. Third Path Iconoclast and Young Pyromancer can also join Kaikar, already in this list, amongst the host of creatures that make us more bodies as we cast more spells. With several options together in the deck, we could be ramping up our mana curve along with the size of our army very, very fast. Okay, what else? How about we use these token generators to fuel some card draw too? I'm a big fan of Welcoming Vampire and Tokasha's Welcome for being your draw engines in decks that make tokens. These two draw spells when your small creatures enter the battlefield or small mana value creatures enter the battlefield, but at a rate of just 1 per turn. With the previous recommendations, we just need to be casting 1 spell per turn cycle to ensure we're drawing cards on everyone's turn each turn cycle. Easy when the tokens we create can pump out more and more spells. More Convoke spells, more tokens, more cards, but can we do more? Can we really go off the rails? Let's look at the upgrade. If we're taking spending limits off, what else can we add to really make the deck more powerful? With the volume of tokens we're generating, Anointed Procession and Mondrak Glory Dominus are easy first looks. Doubling up on all of our token generation is a fantastic place to start, though both of these options are quite expensive. They're good, but they're expensive. I'd recommend cutting Migratory Root and Duragar Hedgemage to make room for these heavy hitters for sure. Then there's good old Benny Brack's Zoologist. Not only does Benny here have Convoke, perfect for this deck, but he draws us a card at the beginning of each end step in which we created a token. If all goes well, we should be casting a Convoke spell every turn and having something trigger to make us a token. So Benny could very well be a card on every player's turn if we play our cards right. I'd cut Tetsuko Yumazawa for Benny, since we ideally want our tokens getting swole throughout the course of a game with counters or anthems. Now, I don't normally recommend these two, but Leyline of Anticipation and Vidalcan Orrery are kind of key here. We do want to be casting a Convoke spell on everyone's turn, but there are only about a dozen instants in the deck. If we can land one of these instant speed solutions, we could cast a Mana Rock or an enchantment on someone else's turn to trigger all of our effects. Both might not be necessary, but at least one would be nice, cutting the unnecessarily expensive Flight of the Equinauts, even though it does have Convoke. And it's almost up to $40, but Esper Sentinel is really good in the deck. It's passive card draw and can help fuel your Convoke spells too. It's basically a white staple at this point, and I do hesitate to recommend it often, but it does kinda slap in this deck. If you are spending the bucks on it though, you can rest assured that you'll always have a home for it in at least one of your decks somewhere. So now let me know what you think of the Divine Convocation deck out of the box and where it rates for you among the other March of the Machine precons. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you would add or change yourself. And if you've been inspired, you have to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to check out these other precon upgrade guides while you're here, and as always folks, good luck and have fun.